The self-assessment tax return deadline is the 31st of January 2025. If you haven't already submitted your tax return, I'll show you what to do in this video. And if it all feels like too much, then I've got a solution for you too. First of all, do you need to file? If you're self-employed, so you could be a contractor or run your own business, or if you're a landlord, or if you've made a capital gain and your profit is over the annual exemption, that could be on anything from crypto to land to a sale of shares, then it's very likely that you will need to submit your own tax return. There's a full list of who needs to submit a tax return on the HMRC website. So in this video, I'll assume that you're self-employed and I'll give you an overview of what to do. But if you fall into one of the other groups, then you can refer to this guide as well. We're going to look at how to complete your self-assessment for the period from the 6th of April 2023 to the 5th of April 2024, and that needs to be submitted online by the 31st of January 2025. If you submit a paper return, then the deadline was the 31st of October 2024. You do need to register for self-assessment if you want to file online, and the deadline for that was the 5th of October 2024. I'll assume that you do have a unique tax reference and that you can file online, but if you haven't, then you would need to contact HMRC. So once you've logged in, you'll need to click on self-assessment and then complete your tax return. And you should be brought to this page, and we'll start with section 3, which is tailor your return. In section 3 of your return, it will ask you if you're employed, and then it starts to ask you about your self-employment. So first of all, was your turnover more than £1,000 from self-employment? And that's turnover, not profit, because if your turnover is more than £1,000, that's when you have to start disclosing details of your self-employment to HMRC. So I'm going to say yes, and I have one self-employed business, and I'll call it YouTube Limited. And then I'll assume that I wasn't in a partnership, I didn't earn any income from UK land and property, no foreign income, and I didn't make any chargeable gains. You might answer yes to some of these questions. So you just need to work through and think about what happened in the tax year. And then again, we have questions about interest, dividends, pensions, child benefit, and I've ticked no for all of these, but you might need to tick yes if you did receive any of that income. And there's more questions here about what happened in the tax year. And it's just a case of working through these, and you can click on these little links to help you if you're not sure exactly what the question is asking. I've said no to all of them. Once you've done all that, it will take you back onto the progress page. And from here, you need to start filling out details of your employment and your self-employment. So now we're on the part where we're recording information about our business. And this is where you really want to have kept details of your income and expenditure throughout the year to make this part of the tax return easy. If you've not done that, then you'll find that this is probably quite time consuming, because you'll need to go and dig out invoices and receipts as well, so that you can get all of this information to be super accurate. So here, the first question is asking if you have an annual turnover of £85,000 or more. And it's asking that because if you do have annual turnover of more than 85k, you need to break down your expenses in quite a lot of detail. I'll assume that for my business, the turnover was less than 85k, maybe it was 60k, so I'll say no to this. It's then asking if you're affected by basis period reform and if you've got a transition profit or loss to declare. This is a question that's unique to the 23-24 tax year. You need to select yes to this if your business's basis period that you're filing for ends before the 5th of April 2024. I'm going to assume that I'm recording details for the 6th of April 23 to the 5th of April 24, which means that my business's basis year for my tax return aligns to the tax year. So I'm going to say no. This question's here because HMRC are trying to start taxing profits on a tax year going forward rather than on a business's basis year. That was the case previously. So 23-24 is a transition year as HMRC try to get to the new way of taxing businesses. So it would affect the numbers that you input here if your business's basis period doesn't align to the tax year, but I'm assuming that I'm completing this information for the tax year to make it simpler. This is one example of how the tax return process can get quite complicated with complex questions, and you might feel more confident using a qualified accountant to help you complete your tax return. This is where the sponsor of today's video, Tax Scouts, comes in. Tax Scouts is an online platform that will pair you with a UK accredited accountant to complete your self-assessment tax return. They charge just £169 to complete and file your tax return, which is a lot lower than traditional accountants. Plus, it's just a fixed one-off cost rather than having any ongoing accounting fees. Your accountant will have at least 5 years post-qualified experience and will make sure that your tax return is accurate and completed in line with HMRC's most up-to-date rules. The other big benefit is that you will have the comfort and headspace of knowing that your tax return is being taken care of. The process will run like clockwork, and you can spend more time working on your business instead of your taxes. If you want to try it, I've got 12% off for you, and I will leave the link in the description box below. So now let's return to our online filing, and you'll have a series of questions to answer about your business. I'm not going to go through each one in turn, but you do need to work through them. And like I said before, there is help available for each question if you're not sure what it's asking. You'll then come on to the numbers, and this is where you need to know your income and expenses for the year. So like I said before, my business made less than 85,000, which means I don't need to break down all of my expenses. So I'm going to say that my turnover was £60,000 and I didn't receive any other income. And then I would like to record my expenses as a single total rather than providing a detailed breakdown. So I'm going to say that my expenses were £10,000. And so my net profit was £50,000 for the year. And you'll notice that it asks for total allowable expenses. So this is another example of where you need to understand the difference between what's an allowable expense and a disallowable expense. Because what you can deduct for accounting purposes can sometimes be different for tax purposes because the tax rules are different often from accounting rules. So some expenses that you may have deducted from your accounting turnover may not be deductible for tax purposes, and that's where you do need to understand how that rule works. Now there's a section about capital allowances. So this is all about assets that you've bought for use in your business. So depending on the asset, you often can't take a full deduction for the cost of the asset, and instead you get to claim a percentage of the asset's cost if it qualifies, and depending on which pool the asset qualifies for. The rules are quite specific, so you may need to get professional advice on this if you have bought assets for use in your business to make sure that you're claiming all of the reliefs that are available to you. And just continue to work your way through these questions. We have some here about class 4 NICs. I'm saying that none of these apply to me, but they may apply to you. And then you can provide any other information that you want to for your business. Once you've finished completing the information about your business, you will need to complete all of the other sections as well, but you can save them and come back to it. You don't need to complete everything in one go. This can all be quite a lengthy process, especially if you're having to research some of these questions for yourself if you haven't seen them before. And that's why a lot of people will use an accountant to help them complete their self-assessment tax returns. Hopefully this video helped you to understand how to go about doing your own self-assessment, and then you can choose if you do want to use an accountant or not. Whatever option you go for, just don't bury your head in the sand, because HMRC will issue you with a penalty if you don't submit your tax return by the deadline. Let me know in the comments how you get on with your self-assessment and which option you went with. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.